And now let's get story-oriented. He's the New York Times best-selling author of The Book Thief, which was just named America's 14th favorite novel by PBS viewers in their Great American Read. I sat down with him recently here in Washington to talk about storytelling and his newest epic, only 13 years in the making, Bridge of Clay. Here's my exclusive interview with Markus Zusak. So Markus, tell me, Bridge of Clay, 13 years to write this book. Why did it take so long this time?
Well, I say this with a smile on my face, but there was a fair bit of failure right from the beginning. And I think for a long time, I'd always thought of this book as being my best idea. I thought of it when I was 20 years old, which is more than 2 decades ago. And I think when you think of something as your best idea, you've already put pressure on yourself. And so I think I just got a bit over-focused on making every single thing perfect as I was writing it. And I think you can easily lose sight of the fact that it only has to be the best it can be when it's going to the printer.
Right.
And you just have to just get your hands dirty and hope for the best for a long time as well.
What was it about this story that made it so elusive? I mean, we all have our kind of pet ideas that you're almost afraid to approach because they occupy such a piece of your heart in some ways. What was it about this one that made it so hard to get on paper?
I think it was pretty much everything. I mean, firstly, the idea, it's about a character who wants to make something perfect. Then I decided he could have a brother and a sister. That was in the original incarnation of the story was that was 20 years ago, and I thought, well, that didn't work. And I ended up with 5 brothers in a family, and then I wanted to go into the backstory of their parents as well. And so I just thought, because who we are actually starts long before we're born, and so I wanted to write a character who's building his whole life into this bridge he's building. And I love the idea that novels are complete worlds. And so it's a matter of figuring out how many countries you want to have on the map. And I think maybe I put a lot of, work into the planning, and sometimes you just don't know quite when to stop. But it was, my favourite moments talking about this book were when people would say to me, if you're having so much trouble with this book, just write one of your other ideas. And I'd say, I haven't got any other ideas.
This is it.
This is it. But now I realise I did have other ideas, but they were all going into this book. It was very much a sense of all or nothing. For a long time, it was nothing.
Yeah. Well, this is about Clay Dunbar, who wants to build a bridge over a river before it floods. And I don't want to give away too much more because it would reveal too much. That's not really what the book is about. That's on the surface what the book is about.
Yeah.
What would you tell people you discovered in the telling of this story that they need to hear today?
I think it was just if I'm asked the question, and it's always, as you know, the toughest question, what's your book about?
What is it about?
You stumble and you trip over, and and then finally you walk away, and then you go, oh, I should have said this.
Right.
But I think it's about a family, really, and it's about one moment that decimates that family, and one boy in the family that takes it upon himself to bring them all back together. And I don't think he realises he's doing that. He's really wanting to build a bridge to make something great and beautiful and perfect, to atone for what he feels are his sins. And what he doesn't know is that that's the way he's going to get his brothers and their father back together. But he's really just wanting to mould his life into this bridge, and it's made of stone, but it's made of him, it's made of clay. And that was what drew me to the story in the first place, was the idea that clay as a material can be moulded into anything, but it needs fire to set it. And once I had that idea for the book, I knew that it was something that I was going to try to get right for what looks like, a good portion of my own life.
A chunk of your adult life.
Yeah.
Originally, there was a girl narrator, Maggie. You discarded that and ended up with one of the brothers, Matthew being the narrator of the book, who is the narrator now. Why that change? What happened in the old telling that you didn't like?
Well, it just wasn't working. And I could recite the first 50 pages of that book without even thinking. I'd be walking down the street, mumbling her narration to myself, but it just never quite. I never felt quite comfortable with it. And I think when you're working so hard and you think, but it just didn't feel right. And then after 6 years, I had to make that dreaded decision. And you're always being tested as a writer, I think. You're always being tested with the question of how much do I want this? Right. How hungry am I to get this story written? And I think when you're faced with a dilemma like that, I tried everybody. I tried Matthew as the narrator. I tried every brother. I tried even their mother.
That's what I was going to ask you. Did you try the mother as a narrator?
I did, but then, not to give a spoiler, it said right at the beginning that there's this, one of the lines is their mother was dead, their father had fled.
Right.
And but then I thought, in my previous book, The Book Thief, I had death as the narrator. Right. I thought if I have a dead character as the narrator, I thought, I don't want to just be the death guy all the time. So, that's definitely sounding a bit grim. So it ended up being Matthew as Clay's brother when I just started believing it. And that's what made me want to be a writer in the first place, was you're reading something that someone has entirely made up, but when you're in it, you believe it. And when Matthew started telling the story about digging up an old typewriter in an old backyard of a town, I thought, now I'm feeling alive again. And I think you would recognise this too, that I'm just happiest when I'm writing and I'm writing well. And when you're getting those little sparks of ideas that say, this is when I'm at my best.
Well, you're telling yourself the story. There's an excitement as the story is coming to you. And so you can imagine, well, it's an experience you're passing along to the reader. But unless you're touched and excited, you can feel that in the narrative, if it's working or not. I mean, you really do.
Yeah, and so that's exactly how it felt. I mean, it's not that there aren't struggles then. Yeah. I still got to a point in 2016 where my wife said to me, and she's really the unsung hero of this book, where she said to me, it was one of those great moments of tough love. She said, I'm giving you 1 week to get this book back on track at a point where you're actually happy with it again. And she said, other than that, you and Clay
have to separate.
The character needs some, she said, I think you two need some time apart. And which is better than her saying that she and I need some time apart.
Right, exactly.
And so I worked for a week, nothing changed. And and I did quit the book for 6 weeks. She said the most dreaded thing that you could say to me. She said, why don't you work on your blog for a while? And the point is, no one in the world knows that I would even have a blog.
Knife in the heart.
I'm not good at that sort of stuff. And I tried to write a small side project. And I thought, for that, I was sort of empty, because I just said to myself at one point, God, before you were writing for the World Championship of yourself, when you were writing Bridge of Clay, and now you're doing this. And so I think sometimes the old cliche is true, that we don't know what we've got until we lose it.
That's true.
And when I started again, I just went in with the idea that, it's a struggle to write a book, but it's actually a joyful struggle. And when I went in with that approach, I just started really loving it again. And 6 months later, I finished the book. And I also had been beating myself up for so long that it wasn't done, I was really, and then I realised how much work I'd actually done on the book. I just needed to finish it.
Right.
Just the last quarter to go.
Well, it is a complex book. You have chronologies, you have a lot of flashbacks and multiple character narratives. How did you keep track of all that? Or did that just come in the constant work over many years?
Well, I think every single thing in that book, whether people love it, don't love it, and it's all deliberate. Everything is there for a reason. Every word is there for a reason, and so when I'm willing to wear that if people say, I got confused here, but I've always said to myself that every time I write a book, I want it to be a better book than the last one, or at least it's got to be a great attempt, and it's all in the attempt, and in this case, I've sort of said to people, there are different challenges in this book to my previous books, but I think the rewards are greater. And I know they have been for me in the writing of it. And I think as a writer, sometimes you have to just remember that. The next time you're beating yourself up about, it's a bit like it's no different to surfing in some ways. Whenever I'm at home and I go for a surf, and I'm always thinking, why am I always the worst surfer out here? And that's how I feel about writing. I'm like, why am I always the worst writer here? And then you have to remind yourself, it's because I'm trying to do something. I'm always trying to write above myself. I'm trying to write better than I actually am. And that's the sort of writer I want to be, and I think it's the sort of person I want to be too.
The last book, The Book Thief, mined your parents' experiences in World War II. What was the root, the personal connection to this story, to Clay's story?
I think I was just always kind of ambitious as a kid, and I think that's because I'm the youngest of 4 siblings, and so I grew up with everybody saying, no, you can't play Monopoly, you're too young. No, you can't play cards, you're too young. Which sounds almost petty, and maybe it is. But I was always a kid who, and this is really what it is. It wasn't so much a sense of one day I'm going to show everybody. It was more just what I love is stories, whether they're written or whether they're told to me. And so I was spoilt as the youngest of 4 kids, not by getting material things. I was spoilt by the fact that I got to spend the most meaningful amount of time, for the longest amount of time, with my mum and dad. And they told me their stories when I was a teenager, and I would ask for them over and over again. And so the root of this book, or the heart of this book, I think, is just how much I've always loved stories. And Clay is that sort of kid as well. He's the one who asks his mum and dad for the stories about, when his dad did bury his dog and the snake who fought each other in his old backyard in that country town, and then how he buried his mum's typewriter in the backyard as well. And it's that very typewriter that Matthew goes out and digs up to write the story on. So I just love the idea that one story isn't just a story. No. It's the story that came before it and after it, between it and underneath it. And that's what this book is doing all the time.
Well, I loved a couple of things, and you've touched upon them. It's a sweeping family saga, really, of memory, of secrets and stories, and how the decisions of all those around us shape our own journey. We're not alone. And this is such a powerful theme for me and in my work, because look, I have a middle grade series that contains a whole family. The kid doesn't go on the adventure alone. It's the complications of the family around him and the powers of that family that propel him or hold him back. And that's similar to what we find here, because this is life. And I loved that dimension of the work, that it's not afraid to go to those places, and it takes you to some of those unexpected. There's some memories you never want to see again or hear about, and yet they end up being the most important for not only the character but the reader in this case.
Yeah, there's a moment in the book that you may have come to where Penelope, Clay's mum, is actually telling him what he calls the unedited versions, because there's this idea that when we tell truths, we tell them as almost everything. There's always something we leave out. And towards the end of her life, she tells him the almost everythings. And then she says, you've got to ask your dad. Tell him, please, tell him about how you used to be able to draw and paint. And did you know he once buried a typewriter in his backyard? And she says, these stories aren't just stories, they're who we actually are. And that's why I'm a writer. That's why I love books, and that's why I'll always be writing. Whether even if a ray of light came out of the sky and said, "You'll never write another book. You'll never be published. You'll never get anything for it," I would still be doing it, because it's what keeps me alive.
What are you working on now?
Absolutely nothing.
Aside from promoting Bridge of Clay.
I've come out the other side of this book, which has been a struggle at times, really loving writing more than I ever have. And so for that reason, I'm just going to write for a while and see what happens. But I've got a few different ideas, but I'm not sure which way I want to go with them yet. And there are a lot of characters in this book that could have been novels of their own, and whether I explore that, I'm not sure, but we'll just see how we go. Okay, there are questions I ask every author that sits in the chair. I've asked you a few of these, but we do this on every Story-Entered show. Your favorite children's book, the one that shaped you the most, do you think? Well, growing up, I'm just going to go with Green Eggs and Ham. Oh,
Okay.
for the sheer positivity. And
the repetition.
Well, and the grumpiness. So there's sheer positivity, sheer grumpiness, and you bring those two things together, and what a combination. And
I agree.
And I love that moment of sheer exasperation. Of like, if you let me be,
okay, I'll take
will
a
try
bite.
them, and I may see, and whatever the exact line is. So that's an old favorite.
Mine too. I used to love reading that to my children just to affect my inner Walter Matthau of absolute exasperate. No, Sam, I am. No, Sam, I. And you keep ratcheting up. The drama is there. What is your least favorite children's book or book? Period, and why?
Well, you're probably going to despise me for this. And it's purely because...
Only if it's me. Then I'll despise you. But no, you're okay now.
I'm actually mentally and physically incapable of saying that about somebody else's book. So I'm going to go to the book I tried to write when I was 16.
Oh, that's a cop-out, Marcus.
No,
It's being too nice.
You can say that as much as you want.
Come on, give me somebody who's actually written a published book. I'm going to change the question. What published book is your least favorite?
I can't tell you that.
Oh, so you're going to cop out and not give me a least favorite book?
Yeah, I don't think I'm capable of it. I mean, I could go, so even if I was to do this and say, what about The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, purely because I wish I had written it.
Oh, okay.
And so I love it so much that,
that is your least
only way
favorite.
I can despise it is by saying,
I see.
I wish that when I was 16, I could have written like that.
Okay. This is called this is an underhanded
You
dodge.
will never win this game.
I know. I'm not even going to try anymore. Where do you write and why?
I'm pretty much like a virus, and I just move from one place to I'm nomadic, but I do have set routines. I have a workroom, but every now and again I really love to work in the kitchen as well. And let's go close to the coffee machine.
Yeah, and food.
The coffee machine, if our house was burning down, the coffee machine would probably be among the first things.
That and the pencils would come out with you. Are you a plotter? Do you lay it all out, or do you feel your way through it?
I'm definitely meticulous about the way I plan a book, and I just write chapter headings out over and over, right through to the very end.
Really?
And even when I haven't written for a while, that's my way back into the book, is to write out the chapter headings again. And that's kind of how I know where I'm going.
Wow, you write those before you write the chapter?
Yeah, I write them hundreds and hundreds of times. And it's just, I wish I could write a book that was just chapter headings.
Maybe you can. I've seen some newly published books. You get away with a lot today.
Be surprised.
Yeah. Final question. What would be your advice to parents trying to get that reluctant reader in the house to read their first books and to go on a literary adventure?
I would just say to be seen reading yourself, and but also just to pick a book that you're going to love reading aloud
that they
to them.
enjoy.
And we do that at home, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
There's usually a bit of yelling at some point, but it's such a joy to share stories like that, and it's not always possible, even if you go on holiday.
I
there's
agree.
a chance to do that.
I agree. Marcus, thank you so much. Bridge of Clay, available everywhere now. Fantastic read. Thanks for spending time with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a joy.
Such a pleasure.